Welcome everybody for connecting to this virtual launch of our newest title in the Recovered Books series from Boiler House Press, and So Did I, which was Malachi Whitaker's 1939 memoir of sorts, and that of sorts is probably one of the reasons why it did sort of get dismissed when it came out, and also has not remained in print like something that we would recognize as a classic of its period, say the novels of Woolf or Elizabeth Bowen or Evelyn Waugh or something like that. With us today, we have Valerie Waterhouse, and I'll talk about Valerie's connection with the work in a little bit. But Valerie not only wrote the afterword for this, but is the literary executor of Malachi Whitaker's estate and was really crucial in our being able to bring this book together back to print in this time frame, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So I'm gonna give a little talk about what the Recovered Books series is about, and then focus on Malachi Whitaker, who was she, and kind of my own discovery and how we got this book back into print. And then Valerie will talk for a while about her work. She's working on a biography of Whitaker, and we'll talk about some of the discoveries that she's made, both in the general researches and then specifically in the context of this book. Then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. I love to see this kind of turnout. Lots of familiar names to me, so it's great. I will ask that you go on mute, mainly because Zoom is hypersensitive to background noises. So something like a passing truck or a barking dog could suddenly put you in the middle of our video, and we put these things up on YouTube, and I'm sure you'd like to not become a YouTube star. So if I mute you, that's the reason why. Okay, so let me start a little bit by talking about where we are with the Recovered Book series and how we got to this publication of And So Did I. As I mentioned, kudos to Valerie. Valerie is a member of the Biographers International Organization, as am I. And Valerie was the first winner of the Kitty Kelly Award for research, which is a phenomenal grant. Valerie might talk about that a little bit, but it's pretty exceptional, particularly because this is even though it says it's international, it's a heavily US-based organization. So she beat out a lot of Americans for that honor, and good work on that. So, And So Did I came out at the end of September. We tend to release our titles on a sort of quarterly basis, 4 times a year. We had an introduction, very lucky to have an introduction by Catherine Taylor, who unfortunately was not able to join us today for this discussion. And then Valerie Waterhouse, of course, was critical to that, and I'll talk about how she played a role and contributed to the overall shape of the book. So the Recovered Books series is something I started with the help of Nathan Hamilton, who's the publisher for Boiler House Press and the director of the UEA Publishing Project, the publishing arm of the University of East Anglia. It's sort of a atypical university press. It's not really focused on academic publishing. And I was working, helping out Nathan with some projects during lockdown when my wife and I were kind of stuck in the UK after I finished my master's program. And I approached him about publishing a book that I knew of and loved, that you see on the upper left-hand corner of this slide, Gentleman Overboard, a book that came out in 1937 and essentially got completely forgotten, but it's a phenomenal story. It's about a man who falls off a ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and no one notices. So you can imagine what his fate is going to be. And yet it's a beautiful, it's funny, it's moving. And we brought that book out, and Nathan said, well, why don't you, I know that you are interested in neglected books and forgotten writers, so why don't you propose a series? And so I did. I certainly leaped at that opportunity. And so we launched the series 4 years ago. Actually, our first title came out in November of 2021, which was Gentleman Overboard. And since then, we've published 16, now 17 titles with And So Did I. And we have 4 a year planned for the next, well into 2028. So it's promising to see that. And we try to keep a diversity. So the goals for the recovered book series are really threefold. First of all, to bring forgotten and often difficult to find. There are a number of publishers that are doing kind of recovery publishing, people like Persephone. I think one of the things that distinguishes us is that in many cases, these books are not just forgotten, but they're like deeply forgotten. Some of the titles we've published have been essentially impossible, like to find. Trance by Appointment, for example, which we published in May of this year by Gertrude Trevelyan. Trance by Appointment, the only copies in any libraries were those in the UK registry libraries, like the Bodleian, the British Library, the National Library of Scotland. So I actually went to the British Library and copied, scanned Trance by Appointment in entirety, because there were no other copies of that book, and now it's in print. Also, we don't stick to any particular period or genre. So we've done memoirs like And So Did I. We've done a collection of poetry by the American poet Gertrude Taggart or Genevieve Taggart. And we really try to go across countries. We've published American works. We've published a couple of works in translation and have more to come in that vein. Also, to me, it was important because one of the things I like to do is to go into university libraries and scan the stacks. And what you will notice when you do that is that a writer like Malachi Whitaker, it's not unusual to find a few of her books in a university library. But what you don't see are the critical works that analyze, or you don't see the biography, you don't see the critical analysis, you don't see the extension and the discussion of the work in the context of the literary history of the time. So we also include somewhat academic, scholarly afterwards, like the one Valerie has written, to try to encourage researchers to look at these writers and expand their notion of the canon. And then finally, we want these to be good-looking books that are first and foremost exciting and interesting to read. And I think And So Did I meets all of those criteria. So just a little bit about how we came to publish this book. I spend a lot of my time looking through old book reviews. And as I've often mentioned, it's not the overwhelmingly enthusiastic reviews that really catch my eye. And I was going through some back issues of The Spectator in the 30s, and I found this comment from a review that said, "This book from a conventional literary point of view is worthless." Now, from my experience, when a reviewer makes that kind of comment, there's only one of two situations going on. One is it's really junk, but most publishers don't publish total junk unless it's just pulp fiction that's throwaway. So very often when a reviewer makes a comment like that, it shows that they fundamentally misunderstood what the writer is doing. And so when I see those sorts of things, when I see a writer saying this is an odd book, or I didn't really understand what the writer was trying to do, it sort of sends off my spidey sense, and I really become interested in seeing what's going on with that. So when I saw that sort of blatant comment that the book was worthless, it really intrigued me rather than turned me off. So I located a used copy. I got a library discard of the Carcanet reissue of And So Did I, and I read it, and I wrote about it back in 2018 on my site. I said that it was, I thought it was a wonderful book, and I commented in that piece that it was clear to me that one of the reasons that it did get some negative reviews when it first came out is that it was attempting something that memoir writers hadn't tried to do before. If you look at memoirs of the 30s and earlier, they're very conventional kind of works. They're kind of, this is my life and I remember this and I remember, and they're sequential, and they definitely work with a structure of the narrative structure is the structure of one's life. It's very chronological. Whereas Malachi Whitaker's approach in And So Did I is much more impressionistic. It's fragmentary. But ironically, it's the sort of thing we see a fair number of memoirs doing today and being received enthusiastically. So when I read that, I of course wanted to look into who was Malachi Whitaker, and why did she write this book, but what was her background? And I quickly learned that she was really one of the great short story writers of the first 30, of the 20s and 30s in England. Numerous short story collections in really a shorter period of time, 1929, 1930, 1932, 1934. A number of his stories selected by Edward O'Brien in his annual collection of best short stories from England and America. At least 3 of the editions had stories by Malachi Whitaker. She also she participated. I mean, you can see she was sort of recognized as not just a good writer, but sort of in the literary community of the time. So she contributed a chapter in this odd book from the Cockerell Press called Consequences, which is the sort of serial game, like with writers whose names we can recognize today, at least Elizabeth Alwyn and A.E. Coppard. Some of the others have become lesser known over the course of time. She was also friends with a woman who wrote under the name of Gay Taylor, and collaborated on an anonymous satire or parody of the Victorian, prolific Victorian writers of 3-volume novels. This a woman named Ethel Firebrace. And if you've ever read an autobiography of somebody like sort of a lesser novelist of the Victorian Edwardian period, like Eliza Lynn Lytton, you'll find that they're quite full of themselves and quite proud of their accomplishments. And Ethel Firebrace is all that and more. She's written hundreds of books, and she's completely a narcissistic egoist, and it's quite a funny book. Whitaker has had a number of collections of her stories published over the course of time. So in 1949, she had one. So that was kind of a collection of best of, and a very nice selection. Carcanet issued a selection in 1984, and there's the collection that was issued by Persephone back in 2017 with an introduction by Philip Hensher. Even And So Did I. We won't claim that this is as neglected as some of the titles that we've put out. So it did come out in 1939. It fell out of print. It's almost impossible to find copies of the book today. It was reissued by Carcanet in 1987, and a paperback edition came out with this truly gauzy deceiving cover in Paladin paperback. She was not clearly an Edwardian or Victorian young woman reflecting on her life in comfortable fashions. And I think Philip Hensher said something very profound in his introduction to the short story collection that came out from Persephone, which is she's not like other authors because she has a very personal voice. I think it's a voice that's sort of more contemporary now and better understood by readers because it is casual, it's personal, it's intimate. She is impressionistic in picking out things rather than trying to create simply a classically well-structured short story. So when I started my master's program at the University of East Anglia in the fall of 2019, I was talking with my tutor about possible subjects for research. And I mentioned the fact that I was enthusiastic about Malachi Whitaker's work, and so did I. In fact, I commented at her if I was to ever start a publisher, I would try to republish, and so did I. And also, I was interested at the time of possibly writing something about Gay Taylor, her friend, for many years. And my tutor, Helen Smith, passed along Valerie Waterhouse's email address and said, well, there's this woman, English woman who lives in Italy. She's interested in doing a program about biography, and she's interested in focusing on Malachi Whitaker, and why don't you talk to her? So I reached out to Valerie. As you can see, it was in December of 2019. We connected, we traded a couple of emails, and that was kind of the end of it. And then when I was doing some planning for this recovered book series, I thought, I wonder, what's the situation with Malachi Whitaker's estate? Because nobody's picked up, and so did I. And it's to me, it's just such a timely book in its whole style and approach. Particularly, she's on the cusp of World War II. It's an uncertain time, and yet she's trying to capture daily pleasures. I just thought this is a book that anybody who reads it would find things that they can that would resonate with them. So I reached out to Valerie again and said, sort of like, do you know who's responsible for the literary estate of Malachi Whitaker? And she came back and said, I am, or I'm in the process of becoming the literary executor. So this is great. Plus, I'm planning to speak at the Ilkley Festival in the fall of 2025 about Malachi. So if we could line up everything to get this book out by that time frame, there's a great opportunity to kind of publicize it. That's a much shorter time frame than we normally work with in this series. We're normally working 18 months or more in advance of the publication date. But I thought it was such a terrific opportunity, and the cooperation, among other things, Valerie provided us with numerous illustrations and photos of Malachi, which are really critical as we were trying to figure out the design for the book. And as we were doing that, what we were really captured by more than anything were those amazing eyes in that one studio photograph of Malachi. So we've never previously put a photograph of the author on the cover of one of our books, but we just thought that image was so striking. Although some have said it looks like she's wearing a hijab, which is certainly not what's indicated. And so amazingly, from starting in December, we got the text together, we got the contributions, the graphic, it all got put together in what is really record time for us. And so here we are now with the book out and getting reactions for that. I'll stop here and turn it over to Valerie, who has a little presentation about her research. So let me just bring up your presentation, Valerie.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes, and just let me
Okay,
know when you need another slide.
okay. Yeah, so the reason I was really keen to get the book out in 2025 is first of all because it's the Bradford, which is Malachi's birth city. It's the Bradford is the UK City of Culture this year, which meant that the festivals in the Yorkshire area were interested in the book and so on. And also because it's actually 130 years this year since she was born on the 23rd of September 1895. And I had been approached by another publisher about a book, and then that didn't work out. So I was just like really, really looking to publish something this year when Brad contacted me. Anyway, Brad asked me to do a kind of behind the scenes at the museum type of talk rather than a straightforward biographical talk. So I'm going to talk about, I kind of called it those aha moments, there's kind of discoveries, surprises, coincidences you find while you're researching, and which kind of keep you going, because I've been working on Malachi for 10 years now. The first few years, it wasn't as intense as it is now. I was caring for my parents. I was working as a journalist, you know, have a family, and I was kind of fitting it in amongst. And then in 2022, I started to do a PhD, and that's when it became very, very intense. But those aha moments, so those moments when you kind of go, aha, I found something out, I've discovered something, I've seen a connection, something's just come up, a coincidence has happened, and I never thought it would, and I've found this new piece of information out. And it's that feeling of kind of excitement, which anybody who's worked on their family history will know about, or anybody who's worked on any kind of research project, whether it's science or otherwise. We have the next slide, Brad. Can we have that? Yeah, okay, great. So one of the things, this is a kind of less of an aha moment than a long process of putting names to faces and a long piece of research over the years. But for example, in So Did I mean, I remember the first time I read it, I didn't really know anything about Malachi, and I didn't know any of the people in the book were. But one thing is that in 2015, a friend of mine discovered that Michael Whitaker, who was Malachi's son, lived about a 15-minute drive from my parents in West Yorkshire. So I was interested in writing an article about Malachi at that time, and I went over to speak to Michael, and then I just ended up getting completely fascinated and pulled in by the story. And Michael was then in his 80s, and when I was over with my parents, I'd often go over to share a cup of tea with him and record a lot of his reminiscences about his mother. And then I got to know his sister Val and her husband Brian, who lived just north of London. And over the years, they entrusted me with a lot of family photographs, which I will eventually put in an archive when I finish my research. But on these photographs, we can see Malachi and her two children, Michael and Val, who in the book are known as Nick or Nicholas and Jane or just Baby. Malachi herself was really called Marjorie. I mean, her family all called her Marjorie. She was born Olive Marjorie Taylor, which became Marjorie Whitaker. She gave herself the name Malachi when she started writing, but all her literary friends called her Malachi. In the other photograph, you can see her husband, Leonard, who in the book is called Kay, again, with the two children, baby Jane or Val and Nick or Michael. In the book, he's called Kay, and I believe Leonard is called Kay, and I believe that was probably because inspired by Kay in The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, which was one of Malachi's favourite stories. Can we have the next picture? Here we have Malachi's family, the Taylors, all of whom occur in the book, who pop up in the book as various guises. So Malachi was the 8th of 11 children of a Bradford book tailor, James Taylor, who's the old man you can see in that photograph on the left. And she, at the time of And So Did I, which she wrote between 1937 and 1938, 3 of her siblings still lived in the Rose Bradford area, which is mostly where And So Did I is set, and where she lived with her family. So in this picture on the left, working from the left, we've got Ida, who is the sister in the book. Malachi, in fact, had 5 sisters, and it took me quite some time to work out which one was the sister. But looking at kind of researching family ancestry on sites like Ancestry and working in Bradford archives and with papers, I worked out that Ida was really the only one in the area at the time. Then we have her mother, Annie, who died in 1935, 2 years before she started writing And So Did I, but is mentioned several times retrospectively. Behind Annie, we have Ralph, a brother who lived very close by with his wife, Ella. Then Malachi, the pretty one in the middle there. To her right, we have Gilly, another brother who lived very close by with his wife, Barbara, who's the dark-haired lady on the right. And her dad is, of course, the man with the beard, James Taylor, who's suffering from dementia. unfortunately, while she was writing, and so did I, and died while she was writing the book. And then very quickly on the right, we have Gilly again, who's one of the brothers in the photograph with his wife, Barbara, and their two children, Sheila and Donald, both of whom also feature in And So Did I quite a lot. They're the cousins with whom Malachi's two children play a lot because they're very similar ages. And there's one point, for example, where Donald and Michael get covered in tar. Malachi has to find a way of getting rid of this tar. Can we have the next picture? Yeah, so identifying houses, whereas with the people, I mainly relied on Val in particular, identifying people in photographs and then matching them with descriptions in the book. With the houses, it was more complex because over her life she lived in 38 different houses, so she claimed, and many of which I've tracked down, and there's a lot of moving about in and so did I. In fact, she lives in, I don't know how many houses in and so did I, a lot. But the two main houses were these two, 25 Clara Road and Bolton Old Hall. I basically have tracked all the houses, or the ones I have found, which are a lot, through every time I come across a piece of correspondence, a letter, an envelope, a document with a definite date and name. I've noted it in my research file over the years, and I've kind of built up quite a picture of where they were at different times. Val and Michael found it really quite confusing because they moved around so much they couldn't even remember themselves. But the two main houses, as I said, are these two. And the one on the right is Bolton Old Hall, which is the rather beautiful house they were living in at the time of writing And So Did I, which was, they were basically at this point living their best nouveau riche life, because having been started off in a sort of upper working class household, having left home, having left school age 13, and she attended local board schools where her classmates were workhouse inmates, for example, and half-timers at the factories. She started working age 14 for her dad in the bookbindery. But then after the war, they started making money, and eventually they rented this beautiful house, which was about a 5-minute walk from the house on the left, which is the house that Malachi was born in. And her brother Gilly, her sister-in-law Barbara, and her sister Ida, and the two children, Donald and Sheila, still lived in this house. Malachi was probably born in the second window up on the left. That was her parents' bedroom in 1895. I'm just going to very quickly read a very quick, tiny extract about the house on the right, Bolton Old Hall. We keep fires all summer in this cold northern house. Ah, but it's warm here in winter, and our winter lasts for 9 months. I have my room in the new part, which was run up in front of the old house in 1627. We're supposed to dine in the old part, built who knows when, in a room 24 feet long, held up by heavy oak beams and floored in stone flags. But I have most of my meals brought in here in the new part on a tray, in here where there's a thick carpet with 2 layers of felt underneath it. So you can really see how much she's enjoying this luxurious life, and she's kind of pointing out to people that she's made it, while at the same time throughout the book kind of undermining that by sort of saying, but I'm not like you, I come from this kind of a family, not that kind of family, and I wasn't born into privilege. So those two things are kind of going on. Can we get the next slide up, Brad? Very quickly, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but there is a chapter in the book about Malachi's struggles with infertility, and her two children, Val and Michael, were adopted in 1931 and 1935. And it was quite tricky pinning down the house she describes in the book where Michael was brought to. But it wasn't Bolton Old Hall, it was this house. Well, it wasn't this house, it was a house on this street which looked exactly like this, with those kind of Art Nouveau windows, and it was at 33 Haslingden Drive in Bradford. We can move on to the next one. Okay, this again, very quickly, that's a picture of Val just after she was adopted, aged 1 month, with Michael, and a contemporary picture of Bolton Old Hall, how it was when they lived there. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to a different kind of aha moment, which comes when you are trying to pin down articles and reviews about the various books and so on that Malachi had written over time. And of course, people often think that everything's digitalized, but it absolutely is not. I mean, some things are, so you can find things in, archives like the British Newspaper Archives and Gale and stuff like that. But a lot of things aren't. So, for example, And So Did I, the poem, which Stevie Smith wrote as a review, I believe in response to that horrible Spectator article, which had insulted her as well as Malachi, that Brad mentioned earlier. Yeah, that reviewer managed to insult Stevie in the same article. Anyway, this was a discovery. This from turning pages in the British Library. I knew this existed, but I didn't know exactly where. And it's in Now and Then, which was the Jonathan Cape's kind of little literary magazine, and into House Organ. And I was just kind of going through that, and suddenly there was the poem. What an aha moment that was! That was fantastic. And then Brad and I had another little aha moment while I was researching, and so did I, because we both knew about this Listener article in the BBC Listener magazine, which is absolutely, obviously written by someone really brilliant, just a fantastic mind, very insightful, beautifully written, and broadly very, very, very positive. And but with its critiques as well. But we couldn't, it's anonymous just because all of the book reviews in the Listener's Book Chronicle were anonymous. And I wrote to the BBC Archives, but the BBC Archives seemed to be a bit slow, and didn't hear from them. We were in the second proofs when I get this email from a lovely BBC archivist called Elle Spoonen saying, I found a card and it says it was written by a Mrs. A.C. Cameron. Of course, I knew Mrs. A.C. Cameron. I was thinking, who is it? Who is it? Who is it? Is it? And then Else wrote back again and she said, I found another card and Mrs. A.C. Cameron is Elizabeth Bowen. And I was just so thrilled. And I think Brad was too when I told him, because Elizabeth Bowen is just, to anybody who's a kind of like interested in interwar women's literature, is just, I mean, she's just an absolutely terrific writer. In fact, Trudy Tate, who is here, is a real expert on her, and I've attended some of her lectures for Literature Cambridge on her. And I mean, what a writer to be, writing this amazing review of Malachi Whitaker. So
And
yeah,
what a reviewer, because Bowen reviewed like a dog for what, a decade plus. I mean, she was working as a reviewer, particularly for, I think, the Tatler and Bystander. Like, she was publishing weekly reviews of stuff, and to go through that volume and stay coherent and astute was no mean trick, because there were, if you read the reviews of that period, because a lot of the journals kind of had their in-house reviewer who just surveyed a bunch of 5 to 7 books every week. A lot of those are really just so superficial, and it's essentially they've read the blurbs from the publisher and regurgitate it. Whereas Bowen apparently managed to not only read the books, but to find, intelligent things to say about them. So
she
I
definitely read this one for sure. It's so spot on, this review. It's incredible. Anyway, we better move on to the next bit, otherwise I'm never going to finish and there'll be no questions. So yeah, another thing is, when you're doing biographical research, I mean, there's, a lot of people criticize biographical research and kind of say, oh, well, you don't really need it, you should just read the text on its own and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, it can cast such a light when you find things in a text and find the context. You just see things in a whole different way. And that can be that you kind of see it in a different way critically, or it can just be biographically. And in this particular case, there is an amazing hidden story in this book about a local Bradford hero who's pretty much been forgotten, deserves to be remembered. So it's the doctor in the book who crops up several times. He is the equivalent of their GP. the Whitaker's GP. And, you know, he's always popping in and out of the house. And he was also a good friend of Malachi because they were kind of a similar age. And so I'm going to actually do another little quick reading. This is the only other one I'm going to do, but I do want you to hear her voice. Those of you who've not read it, I want you to hear Malachi's voice because Brad said that's the thing about this book. Last night, the doctor called in about 6 o'clock, which is a time he's never chosen before. But it was his birthday, and he knew we had a present for him, and he'd come for it, a pair of winter gloves. It was baking day, and I had the loaves in their tins on the hearth in front of the hot fire, and the guard was up. I'd asked the children if they'd like to be bathed on the hearth rug, and they'd enthusiastically said, yes. Baby was just finished, and she looked clean and beautiful in her long white nightdress. Her eyes are singularly large and trusting, and I think she will be beautiful when she grows up, though her generous mouth is slightly out of proportion now. And Nick was sitting in fresh, hot water, washing himself very soapily when the doctor came. We were all so much surprised that we forgot to wish him many happy returns. He's a very sensible man with children of his own, so he nursed baby while I dried Nick and put his pyjamas on, and then he took away the bath and emptied the water down the kitchen sink and came back and said, why, the house is much cleaner and tidier without any maids in it. Perhaps I have earned this compliment, but he came in at a lucky moment when our hearts were filled with peace and love and tiredness. Anyhow, it was a change from the pain and suffering of which he will see so much. But as you can probably tell from the slide there, in 1939, he was killed on the beach at Dunkirk, tending to wounded soldiers, and he left behind a wife and 4 children. And I was able to recover this story because Val could remember his name, Dr. James Morrissey, even though she was only 4 or 5 when he died. And then I was able to find lots of articles about him. And it just gives such poignancy to those little anecdotes about him. Although Malachi, of course, had no idea he was going to be killed 2 years later when she wrote them. Can we have the next slide? I'll try and be really quick now because we're really running out of time. Yeah, so on a happier note, again, as I was researching, and so did I, looking through a historical, an online archive, looking for actually reviews of, and so did I came across a new article by Malachi that I had not known about. So as well as the books contain about 80 known articles, but there are another 16 that I've found, stories, memoir pieces and articles in other sources such as anthologies and periodicals that were never collected. This particular one was it's called I Gawp When I Come to London, and it was in the Evening News in March 1939. And it's just a funny kind of comic memoir piece about coming down to London as a northerner, and just lots of amusing little anecdotes, including the fact that apparently she used to sometimes walk around with packages balanced on her head when she had too much shopping, because she felt like in London nobody really bothered. Whereas up north, as it says here, she said, doing this up north, I should hear 3 words. Look, yon's daft. Whereas she says in London, all that ever happened was that cars very politely sometimes screeched to a halt as she was crossing a road. That's the end of that one, Brad. Last one, I think. Yeah, so this is a personal one. I think my sister's in the audience as well, so I was maybe going to skip it, but I won't because she's here. So yeah, this is biographers or would-be biographers in my case are often said to choose their subject because they're kind of in some way writing about themselves. I don't know if that's necessarily the case with me, but it's certainly Malachi's history fills in some gaps in my family history, because our great-grandfather, William Waterhouse, was a bookbinder in Huddersfield, so a Yorkshire bookbinder who was killed in World War I, and we don't even have a photograph of him, we don't know anything about him at all. So for me, learning about Malachi's father, the bookbinder, and Malachi's own experience working in a bookbindery at the time when my great-grandfather was doing that job was really, really fascinating to me. And then a couple of weeks ago, I suddenly thought, you know, I've never looked up in the 1921 census what happened to some of the colleagues. she had these colleagues called Gladys Butterfield and Frank Dukes, who worked with her as she was a worker in the bindery. Her dad didn't have her in the office. She was in a work, and she worked with them, and they became really close friends of hers at the time. And I knew they'd moved to Huddersfield. And yes, on the census, I find that Frank Dukes worked at Alfred Jubb in Huddersfield, which was where my great-grandfather worked before he went to the war for 20 years. He went there at the age of 12. He went to war at the age of 32. And in 1921, mine and my sister's great-grandmother, Ada Waterhouse, was actually working in Alfred Jubb bindery, where she'd worked before she was married. And of course, she was desperate for money at this point. And so it's kind of like, I feel like some of Malachi's colleagues might have crossed paths with my great-grandmother. Now, that's a very small thing. And when I told my own family here in Italy, they kind of went, yeah, how exciting, kind of thing. But for me, it is exciting. It's kind of like so motivating when you find things like that out. Anyway, I hope somebody else in the audience, apart from possibly my sister, kind of gets that, and I wasn't sort of wasting your time there. But that's all I've got to say, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Well, thanks very much, Valerie, and for that great presentation. I want to open it up to the audience now. If there anyone, if any of you have had a chance to read, and so did I, and have some reactions you want to share, or if you have questions, you've got the world's expert on Malachi Whitaker with us today, so it's a rare opportunity. Yeah, this is not something, if you were to go into English department in most universities, you'll be challenged to find anybody who clicks on the name Malachi Whitaker, unfortunately, although let's hope that changes with some exposure to what we have available with, and so did I, and I think there'll be other collections of the stories to come, I hope.
Please don't be shy. Ask us something, anything that you thought of. We're both nice.
Can I ask
Trudy,
a question?
thank you for joining us.
Please, Trudy.
Okay, yes. Well, as a comment, really. Her voice is really quite distinctive in a good way. It's quite unique. And of course, I'm trying to place and think, oh, what does this remind me of? The stories remind me a bit of Lawrence. I'm not saying she's deriving from Lawrence, but just in terms of that extraordinary attention to detail, where the story of the little kid who's at home on the very cold day and the mother's gone to a funeral or something. I can't remember where the mother's gone, but it's really cold and she's waiting and she's going to get the milk and stuff. At the end of it, you think, I know what it is to feel cold in a way that I've never actually experienced. I just thought it was amazing, really extraordinary. So I just wanted to make that as a statement. In the memoir, it seems to me she's got a slightly lighter tone, and the voice is a bit more like Stevie Smith, but it's not Stevie Smith, it's her own self. And I suppose if I want to make it as a question, I'd say, how is that light tone slightly almost flippant when she's often talking about quite serious things? How do you think that's working in the memoir, the slight flippancy? Is it flippant? Maybe I'm wrong on that.
That's a difficult question to answer. I'm going to go backwards first. I'm going to say that you're spot on with the D.H. Lawrence comparison, because Lawrence was really one of her prime inspirations, and it was initially published in the Adelphi magazine, and she specifically says that she wanted to be published in the Adelphi magazine above all other magazines, which of course at the time was edited by John Middleton Murray, Catherine Mansfield's husband, because of Lawrence. Because I think she identified a lot with Lawrence, because Lawrence was one of the few very well-known writers who had come from a background not dissimilar to her own. So yeah, definitely very influenced by Lawrence. Stevie Smith, I mean, I think it's just a coincidental overlap, let's say, with it. Just they're both very strongly voiced writers and both quite quirky and funny, I guess. But she was actually influenced by her. Interestingly, I recently did a recording for Lost Ladies of Lit, the podcast, through Brad, and they saw a comparison with E.M. field. But of course, Malachi is much darker as well. So she's got this kind of witty, funny, kind of flippant tone, but there's also this dark underside to it. And I think it's interesting as well. I think the whole part of her looking for God, for example, provokes different reactions in different people, depending on your own faith, I think. The extent of your own faith to some extent, because I found even now that people of faith are a little bit puzzled by that. Whereas for me, as an atheist, or say agnostic stroke atheist, I read it and it felt like, oh, finally somebody's saying all the things I think. But I think at the time it also did upset some reviewers.
I think that's very true. And I think it still probably touches a raw nerve, because you'll find that's actually one of the things that I loved about the book. Is it is a spiritual, I mean, about, or one of the threads running through the book is her coming to grips with, what do I think about, I've been to services through my childhood. The liturgy is part of my, language. I'm an English writer, and I come up in the world of the Book of Common Prayer and the King James Bible, and the hymnals, and that language is part of my cultural fabric. And she respects that because she can tap into it, as she does in many times. But then she also says, but it's not, I can't take the step of saying it just is. I believe, I have that leap of faith, which is, and so she doesn't, it's not resolved in the book. And I think some people are uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, I agree. We've got some questions come up in the chat, Brad.
Yep.
Do you want to read them, or? Yeah.
Well, let's see. I've only seen the one question here. Oh,
I can see two.
So how did the wartime shortages and deprivations affect her and her stories?
So this is Danielle, who is actually a member of Malachi Whitaker's family. Right, Danny, you are married to Malachi's grandson. There she is. Yeah, from the States. Yeah. Do you want to answer that, or?
Well, I have to defer to you. I didn't track.
Okay. So how do wartime shortages and deprivations affect her and her stories? Deeply is my answer to that. Deeply, deeply, deeply. Through both wars. The First World War traumatized her deeply because, well, for all the people of that generation, the war just came at them. They weren't expecting to have that life. There hadn't been a war that affected ordinary people and, involved conscription. Okay, so the conscription didn't come in until, midway through the war, but there hadn't been a war like that for getting on for 100 years. So they were not expecting it. It took over their lives. It devastated their lives. And in Bradford, the Bradford Pals, which was the main unit in Bradford of young men, many of whom were Malachi's brothers, friends, school friends, neighbours, boys she'd known since childhood, were among the first over the tops of the trenches on the first day of the Somme, on the 1st of July 1916, and huge swathes of them were killed or injured. And, this trauma was devastating for all the people of that generation. And her own husband was in the Royal Engineers and was not on the front line. So he had a very different experience, but still, he was a boyfriend when he first went, and they got married in the war, mainly because of the war. But of course, that was also deeply traumatic. And then in the book, she talks about her brother dying, and that was Norman, and he died of TB, which he contracted while he was working for the RAF. So, you know, she didn't write about it all that much. There's only one story which is absolutely about the First World War, and I'll be talking about that at the lecture I'll be giving for Literature Cambridge on the 25th of October, which is quite a remarkable story. It's the only one that's set in the First World War. But many of the stories have these kind of tropes and images from the war, and you can see it there. And also the death of her brother affected her very deeply, and the stories about that, disguised, but they're there. And then the Second World War, well, after the Second World War, she didn't really write very much, and that was partly because, as I explained in the afterword, she had a pretty devastating experience in the Second World War, you know, because not only did her doctor die, but she got a really, really serious illness, had to be operated for a mastoid, and happened to be in hospital when Bradford was bombed. 120 bombs were dropped on Bradford on the 31st of August, 1940, when she was in hospital, and she was evacuated many times. And then it took her a long time to recover, and she had to send her children away because she couldn't look after them for a while. And then Leonard kind of stopped working in the factory, so their income went down. They moved around a lot. So yeah, huge effect, both wars, on her.
Absolutely.
Great question. Thanks, Danny.
Any other questions or comments?
There is another one. There's one from higher up, from
it's a
Sue
suggestion
Kennedy.
for the recovered books about A.P. Herbert's The Secret Battle. I mean, I always appreciate recommendations. It's a variety of issues that we look at in terms of what fits. We are only doing 4 book titles a year, so that does narrow the choice. I will say that we have in the pipeline a World War I novel from America. It's a Great War by Mary Lee, which was actually on the short list for the Pulitzer Prize for 1930, and it was dismissed because the American Legion sort of resented the fact that it had gotten more critical acclaim than another book that the American Legion sponsored a prize for World War I novels, and she was like the critical winner, but they decided to have her split the award with a man because they didn't who wrote about soldiers in World War I, because she was a YMCA volunteer, and they didn't like that at all. Anyway, it's a phenomenal book. I came across it. It's not mentioned really in any studies of World War I literature. It's a massive book, so it's like 600 pages, but highly impressionistic. I mean, it's really full of ellipses and beautiful, moving, so vivid. So we're going to bring that one out in 2027, which will be probably our commitment to World War I literature for a little while.
Sure. Sue Kennedy's got a comment under my comment. Can you see it, Brad?
Let me see.
I can see it if not.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing
Okay,
it.
I'll read it. I've read the stories with mixed reactions, but as I progressed,
okay.
I began to see and feel Malachi's perspective. Also, the parallel with Dorothy Whipple, whose childhood memoir the other day has an appeal to me as an author. That's an interesting comment. I'd be interested to hear from Sue about her mixed reactions as she read the stories and how that changed. But yes, Dorothy Whipple is kind of Persephone favourite. It's a kind of Nicola Bowman's kind of pet project is Dorothy Whipple. And I think she is a little bit lighter than Malachi, also a little bit posher than Malachi. I think she's sort of more in the manufacturing kind of class from the outset. But yeah, they're really good fun, those books. I mean, well, not only just fun, but they're really a good read, let's put it that way. But Sue, do you want to say something about your reactions to the stories?
Yes, when I first read them, I thought they were really rather grim. but then I began to see more into them. And her perceptions and her insight into the feelings of children, the confusion, the disappointments, the misunderstandings of how adults behave towards children, I thought were really remarkably perceptive. And so and other things about marriage and honeymoons and relationships between people were really well presented, and I hadn't expected that from how it began. I think it was five stories from each of the collections, so perhaps she did develop differently over the time. I'd like to get the collections in their entirety, really.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I was impressed after all, after a slow start, to be honest.
Mm. That's the Journey Home collection you're talking about, presumably, is
Yes,
it?
the
Yeah,
Persephone one,
which
yeah.
I wrote the afterword for, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's that's interesting. Actually, I didn't select those stories. It was selected by Philip Hensher and Nicola Bowman, and I would have made a very different selection had it been up to me. I think some of the best stories are still not being published, republished, should I say. And I've got to say, as a literary executive, that one of my ambitions is to get all of her work back into print.
That would be good. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and I
mean, she
think the best
certainly,
collection
a
is
complete
Honeymoon.
stories collection would definitely be justified to show the breadth of her work. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a considerable volume of work.
Mm.
Mm.
She was
Yeah.
an almost contemporary of Dorothy Whittle. I think one was born 1893, the other 1895. So they've got life experiences in common, and also
Yeah.
a fairly well. Malachi has a fairly short writing career, relatively speaking, but
Yeah, and of course, a short story writer rather than a novelist, although I think Dorothy Whipple did write some short stories, but she's primarily a novelist.
yeah.
So that also kind of made a difference, I think, to their profiles.
Mm.
Thank you. That was really interesting to hear. Mm.
If you do a
Trudy.
collected stories, could you fit it in one volume? Or I'm thinking of like Bowen, there's a huge fat collected stories, isn't there? Or
Yeah.
Well,
Mansfield,
there's 96 pieces.
that would be a fat volume.
It'd be a fat volume.
Yeah, I mean, that's a practical consideration for a publisher, is how to put those out in a book that's actually manageable as something to read, as opposed to something that sits in a university library as more of a reference book.
Yeah. Yeah, but it'll probably have to be a couple of volumes at least, wouldn't it? If you think that this Persephone book has got 20 in and it's already a kind of normal sized paperback. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I'd like to see a lot more of them in print though. Unwasted.
We're coming up to the hour. If there are any other comments or questions that folks want to make, otherwise, I just want to mention briefly what's coming up next in the Recovered Book series. So any other comments or questions about And So Did I?
Trudy, do you want to just give a little bit of a shout out to my talk?
Sure. I run Literature Cambridge, and we do these various series of live online lectures and seminars. And we've got a series called Women Writers Season. And Valerie's going to be doing a lecture and seminar. It's a 2-hour slot. It's kind of university level lectures. We sort of pitch roughly at second year university level, but very clear so everybody can understand even if they're not been to university. And Valerie's going to be talking about class and about the short stories. So with the set reading is to read this volume, the Journey Home volume, with the focus on, I think it's about 3 of those, plus Valerie's provided some which are out of print. And you may refer to this autobiography as well, no doubt, along the way, although people won't necessarily have read it, but it'd be good to tell them about it. There's a few places left. It's sold really well, but there's a few places left. So if you go to the Literature Cambridge website, if you're interested, you can book. Thank you.
Super.
Thanks,
Thank you
Trudy.
very much, Trudy. I'm sure a lot of folks are looking forward to that. So I just want to conclude by highlighting what we have coming up in the Recovered Books series. The next one up is actually also by a British woman. This is a novel from 1940 called Makeshift by a writer she published under the name of Sarah Campion. She was the daughter of a Cambridge Don who spent a number of years in Germany as a tutor in a German Jewish family until she left in the late 30s. And Makeshift is a book. I found it on the Internet Archive. It's again one of these which is impossible to find. There are no used copies, really no used copies of the majority of Sarah Campion's works. And it is the story of a woman named Charlotte Hertz, who is a German Jew. And it follows her from 1990, so the days right at the end of the war, after the end of the war, in Berlin, and leads up to the early 30s when, after one of her uncles gets brutally beaten by the SS, she realizes, I need to leave, I need to get out of Germany. And then she spends a number of years sort of wandering through her options. She goes to England, she goes to South Africa, she goes to Australia, and she ends up in New Zealand, as Sarah Campion herself did finally settle in New Zealand, coincidentally. And it's not necessarily that she ends up in a happy place. It's a fascinating book for me. Number one, I find the narrative voice is just incredibly compelling. When I read this, I just read it in 2-3 days because it was so gripping. But she's not a nice person. She's quite nasty about other people. She's also nasty about herself. And it's just, it will be interesting to see what kind of reaction we get to Makeshift, because I think there will be some people who say, I don't like this story at all because she's such an unlikable person. But hopefully, I mean, nothing Sarah Campion has done. She wrote a series of novels set in Australia, and one or two of those have been reissued by Australian publishers, but she's never been reissued by any English publisher. And none of her books were ever published in the United States. So this will be kind of this is a serious recovery effort that we have going on here. I just want to see what comments we have in the chat, if there's anything new. So yes, if you're interested in the lecture for Literature Cambridge, there's a link in the chat. Take advantage of that. And with that, I want to thank Valerie for taking part, and thank Valerie. It's less than a year ago we connected and said, can we put this together? And we did. So
we did. Well, you did. And we must say also Louise did, a fantastic designer,
yes.
Louise Aspinall. What a job she did as well in record time to get that cover together. Fantastic.
Yeah, I've been very blessed. I've had the same designer, actually a Northerner. She's
Is she? Where's she
yes,
from?
she is. She's just north of, she's at Southport, I think. So she went to the UK art school, but then she settled back north of Liverpool.
All right, great.
Yeah, and I've been so blessed to be able to work with Louise on all of the books so far. We've got kind of a great design dynamic that seems to be working so far, and I look forward to doing more books with her. We have a really striking book coming out in March of 2026 that I hope will kind of be a breakthrough title for the series. So with that, thank you all for taking part. This will be posted on the University Publishing Project Boiler House Press channel on YouTube. So if you have friends you want to learn about Valerie, about Malachi Whitaker, and so do I, and hear Valerie's talk, it'll be available online within the next day or so. Take care, everyone.